prayer is an expression of tshuva, ilah, of a higher level of return. Some people think that, prayer might be a lower level. No. It's the higher level of tshuva. However, it needs, as in going out of a bad place, going into a good space, right? You need both. You can't go into a good space if you're still stuck to a bad place, right? If your mind is like full of negativity, because that's what's in your heart, but you cogitated, you willfully think those negative things, right? When you can't engage in doing a mitzvah properly. I mean, you can do it, you can go through the act of doing it, but not in a way that's tshuva law, that it's in a good space, that is done with heart and soul. So you need to go out of a bad place first and then go into a good space in order to that it's called tshuva. Now, anytime you put on tefillin and your heart's not into it, anytime you give charity and you're doing it just, on autopilot, you're still connected with God, but not in the manner that we're talking about here. We're talking about in a different way. We're talking about that you're ever growing, increasing, becoming more. Right? Not just stagnant. And think about it, folks, to be quite frank and honest, most of us in our lives we're stagnant. Maybe you have a little spurts of growth here and there, but for the most part there's stagnation. Here the Alter Rebbe is teaching us about how to be stagnant, how to have the growth.
If you want more, and in an intimate and personal setting, together with like-minded people who seek to grow and become their truest self, click the link below in the description and join the Tanya Rabbi community, TRC.
That's what the tshuva law is. So now when it comes to prayer, it's an expression of tshuva law, of this progressive growth of cleaving, connecting, but it needs to be prefaced with tshuva tata, the lower level of tshuva, meaning getting out of a bad place rather. So, in order that the prayer should be an expression of tshuva law. Again, we can say prayer and we're saying words, and even though that those words are of value, right? The fact that we do say them, there's a value to it, but it's not what we're learning here. So our sages therefore said one should embark in worship, in prayer, in an earnest frame of mind. Hachna is as Rashi explains, which means humility. This is the state of tshuva tata, the lower level of return, humility. And what's that humility? Well, we spoke about in chapters 7 and 8 that you arouse divine compassion by having compassion over your state of being, right? And this is, as the Talmud tells us, we learned this out from actually Hannah in the story in Tanakh of what prayer is, and she had complete humility. She stood before God by the Mishkan Shiloi with a bitter spirit, crying out to God. Right? She became then the mother of Shmuel, Samuel the prophet, crying out to have a child. Right? But yet at the same time, so there's that bitterness that we learn from her, but at the same time our sages teach us that prayer has to be with joy. So the bitterness needs to precede the joy. The bitterness is the like being bitter over your negativity and crushing it, right, is the idea that we've learned previously. Ownership over your stuff. Right, that you, when you know how great you are, and now you can own your stuff, as we went at great length to discuss this, right? And it's not damaging having that bitterness over your negativity, because that's what you've done. You own it, but it doesn't define you. But that is preceding. But prayer has to be done with joy. Now why? Why joy? Because what's prayer about? Prayer is not, as the world thinks, about just, to ask God for things. Yes, there is an element of that. But prayer is about connecting to God. Connecting to God needs to be done with joy. So prayer needs to be done with joy. Yet, you need the tshuva tata before that, the lower level. That precedes it. So the Alter Rebbe said that back in the day, so people would do that by tikkun chatzos. Maybe they would do it at another time. That's not right. That's not something that we are capable of doing. Late at night, and then. But the point is, what the Alter Rebbe says is that to have, to first have ownership, which will bring a contrite heart, humility. That's a preparation for prayer. But then the prayer itself has to be done with joy. And of course, if you don't do your prayer with joy, of course it lessens the power of the prayer. Because you're missing the point of the prayer. That's to connect. And if you're not joyful in connecting to God, so, it's like having a conversation. It's like having a conversation with with someone who is important to you and you love. And there isn't a joy in that conversation. It's ball and chain. Well, obviously the connection's not going to be so great. Right? I hope you get that. Powerful idea. So are you stagnant in your life? Feeling like you're not moving, growing? Or do you sense the growth? I hope those who come here constantly learning Tanya, that you feel constant growth. That doesn't mean there isn't setbacks. Of course there's setbacks. We're still human. I invite everybody to join where we take these teachings and we learn to live with it in TRC. So it gives us an opportunity not to have such setbacks. Tonight we have 8 o'clock. So do we reach the higher level, Andrew is asking, during prayer, and especially the Shema of Tshuva? It depends. If the idea of prayer is that, we may not be fulfilling the prayer in the appropriate way of first having the humility and then standing before Hashem in a manner of joy. You're God's child speaking to your Father. That should be done with joy. The opportunity to connect. Yes, absolute joy. When connecting with Hashem, is it unusual to shake and cry? If you're really into it, then then you can definitely, definitely a sign of a deeper connection. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Vicky. If someone is going through difficult times and cries out from the depths of their heart, is it still less powerful than a prayer said in joy? So that's a good question. Very good, Davida. Thank you. Yeah, sometimes there's a challenge. We're going through difficulties, and so I wouldn't necessarily say that that's lesser, even though it should be done with joy. Yeah. But generally speaking, we're talking about prayer on a regular basis, daily basis. So the prayer should be one of that kind of connection. Yeah. Okay. Now, in conclusion, over here, the Alter Rebbe says that Shabbos prayers in particular are Tshuva law, because the word Shabbos actually spells Shabbos. Those letters, they turn them around, spells Tashuv. Tuf, Shin, Beis spells the same words of letters of Shabbos, means to return. And you're returning a higher level of return. A higher level of return. That's what Shabbos is. So in preparation for Shabbos, you can do the lower level of tshuva prior to it, in order to come to Shabbos, and your prayers are with joy. Shabbos, you don't cry out in pain. Okay, beautiful.